Hello. This is a reading from Saturday, February 18th, 2017. Yesterday, I sat down intending to write about something else, but I didn't get to it because I had that wonderful insight about how Alan was the wake-up call sent to me to get me off that fake American dream path that I thought I was supposed to be on and to get me onto my real path. This real path where I can actually start living and being instead of wondering if I'm following the script correctly. It's so freeing and liberating, and again, I'm so grateful. What I had intended on writing about, though, was an experience I had on Wednesday night. I think I had my first real glimpse into the reality of how things are, at least on some level. I say I think because I was really high. During the experience, I had little tickles of doubt, wondering if what I was experiencing was just a product of being high, wondering if my brain was just making things up in that certain frame of mind. I still don't know the answer, but I decided then to just go with it, and I still hold now that it was a valuable experience, regardless of how it came about. At least I feel like I got something out of it. The funny part, though, is that I remember going back and forth with myself, wondering if I had reached enlightenment. I feel rather silly admitting that, but that goes to show how intense the experience was. I was astounded by what I was experiencing. It was like nothing I've ever felt. So my mind started wondering if that was what enlightenment felt like. The internal monologue went something like this. Oh my God, am I enlightened? No way. I've got so much work to do. There's no way I could have reached enlightenment already. But then, what the fuck is this? On and on. It was comical and literally made me laugh out loud. I know there's really not going to be any way that I can truly convey what it was like with words. It was one of those things that just really had to be experienced. And that's what was so wonderful about it. It was such a pure experience, unlike anything I'd ever felt. I don't think I'd ever felt more alive, more whole, more me. Now that I'm looking back at it, I think it was my first glimpse of unity, maybe. I've been doing all of this studying, gaining an intellectual understanding of how the universe works and how we fit into it, but the spiritual path requires an experiential understanding. It doesn't evolve you to just be able to understand it with your mind. You have to actually live these things. Anyway, this was the first time that I had ever actually experienced myself as something separate, yet in harmony with the other parts of my being. I actually experienced being in my physical and etheric bodies. I actually experienced my mental body thinking and narrating the experience. I actually experienced my emotional body having very deep, profound, almost overwhelming emotions about what I was experiencing. I was actually living in and working with my other bodies and experiencing the fact that I am not them. It was so strange because I experienced the separateness, yet I had never felt so connected either. I felt such immense gratitude for how they allow me to be able to function in this human world. And when I'm talking about these, side note, when I'm talking about these other bodies, I'm referring to them as other bodies because that's how this esoteric stuff that I've been reading at this time refers to them. There's like the physical body, the emotional body, the mental body. And so that's what I mean by these other bodies. I felt such immense gratitude for how they allow me to be able to function in this human world. I loved on them and thanked them, and I felt protective. I wanted to take care of them and help them to grow and evolve too. I realized for sure that I wasn't enlightened. Haha, yeah, geez. When my ego started popping her head in, she started making me question the experience because she was scared for her standing. She started pushing in thoughts that maybe I was going crazy. But I was in such awareness that I realized what was happening almost immediately and realized that being really high might have added to that paranoia. But then I decided to just write it out and have fun with it, being fully in the experience and experimenting with it. I brought full awareness to the sensations of my body. I was in the shower, to the way the water felt bouncing off my skin, the way it felt running down my legs. I brought conscious awareness to what it felt like to intentionally move my limbs. I brought awareness to how I was narrating the entire experience in my mind and didn't try to fight that. Rather, just let it be a part of where I am in my evolution. But I also brought humor to it, realizing how silly it was for my mental consciousness to think that I needed a narrated play-by-play of what was happening. I didn't. I was experiencing it. I brought love and understanding when my emotional consciousness brought so many raw and powerful emotions to the experience of unconditional love that I was giving my entire being. And then I gave myself a gift of fully experiencing sensual physical pleasure, and it was one of the most powerful orgasms I had ever had. I felt some moments of sadness that I wasn't going to be able to hold on to this experience because I definitely hadn't reached enlightenment yet. But I allowed myself to feel sad for a moment and then let it go, knowing that this was a gift experience that would lead me further. I got to actually be for probably the first time ever. And I knew that as amazing as the experience was, it was not the goal, but merely a small glimpse of the possibilities to come. And so I think that the purpose was motivation. Like, look at just a little bit of what is in store. And also, there was a lot of internal struggle at certain points over how I'm treating my physical body. And I think that was part of it too, to gain a more experiential understanding that the different aspects of my being are not fully mine to do with as I please. They are separate beings that deserve my care and respect. It is my responsibility as their master to take care of them. So that was an important realization. Another important lesson was the unity experience. When I was feeling so connected to these other separate parts of my being, I also had the realization that it is like that ultimately with all beings in the universe. We are all separate, independent consciousnesses responsible for our own evolution. But just as I need all of the different parts of my being to function in this human world, ultimately, we all work together in this way in order for the universe as a whole to function. And so while my main objective is to make sure that I am evolving, it is also very important for me to be of service to others, to help them evolve too, because we need all of us in order to keep the universe evolving. Good stuff. And then there's a gap in the writing. And then I continue on. I'm doing some studying now, and I'm on a section about the inner critic. The author, Lee Bladen, in Awakening to Wholeness. This is a book about esoteric stuff. Is also calling the critic the superego. This is the part that I have labeled in myself the judge. I understand what is being said about the superego's role to evaluate, assess, label, and categorize. It is described as the ego self's early warning system to spot potential threats to the ego self from either internal or external sources. It's got extremely high standards and expectations, which it apparently acquired early on from parents and authority figures. It was originally created to help us spot problems within ourselves before others did, in order to prevent judgment and therefore withdrawal of love from them. The judge is very strong and intelligent, and the ego cannot fight back against it. So instead, the ego part, the exile, being attacked by it, withdraws further and will continue to hide away while the superego is active. So just note, in this section, I think I'm using all of these words. The judge, my judge, that's the part that I recognized within myself, the inner critic, and the superego. I'm using those words interchangeably. So just to clear up any confusion. Okay. Sorry, continuing on. So the judge is very strong and intelligent, and the ego cannot fight back against it. So instead, the ego part, the exile, being attacked by it, withdraws further and will continue to hide away while the superego is active. Therefore, the exile cannot be healed if it is under attack from the superego. And therefore, we have to investigate into the superego and find out what triggers it and what its exact motives are. So then it seems as if I need to do some work with the judge first before I'll be able to get closer and work with the exiles. I realize that I seem to have a very strong superego. I've got incredibly high standards and expectations of myself and others. Being disappointed by the people in my life has been a long-running theme. There doesn't seem to be a single person that I have been close to that hasn't disappointed me to the extent that I felt that I no longer wanted them to be in my life. There are some examples where this actually did occur, but sometimes I try to work around it and continue to have a relationship with the person, but that underlying disappointment remains. I'm also extremely critical of myself, to the extent that low self-confidence and esteem has been a long-standing theme in my life too. So we've established how very strong my superego is, but why? Its job is to evaluate everything, internal and external, to determine their perceived levels of threat to the ego self. And its standards were picked up and adopted from the standards perceived by authority figures. So I've been trying to think about whether I was criticized a lot when I was a child to help explain why I've got such a strong judge. I spent much more of my time with mom than I did dad, but I don't really remember much criticizing coming from her. Mostly, it seems, from what I remember and from what she has told me, that more than anything else, I probably just didn't get as much attention from her as Nathan. That's my twin brother. But as far as I can tell, she wasn't critical of me. In fact, I think she was actually very encouraging and supportive. She says that I was pretty self-critical even from a very young age. She remembers me being very hard on myself for coloring out of the lines when I was only 3. And before that time, I was only around dad for like 3 months, right around the time that I was turning 1. And even then, she says that we were actually staying with Granny Sue and Grandpa Elmer at that time, not really with Dad, she found out. So then, where did this come from? Why did I have such high standards for myself from such a young age? Did it have anything to do with not getting enough attention? Like I thought I had to try harder Be more perfect to get attention from her? Or was it just an innate tendencies, an inherent personality characteristic? For some reason, I don't think so. That kind of perfectionism seems like a reaction to something. The point of the superego was to spot problems within ourselves before others did, to spot potential threats to the ego self. So if the extremely high standards were acquired from parents or authority figures, maybe that doesn't necessarily mean that I was being criticized for doing something wrong. Maybe I was just only being praised when I did things perfectly, combined with the fact that I wasn't necessarily getting attention otherwise. And maybe my young mind took that to mean that I only get love and affection or attention when I was being perfect. And then my super ego sprang up and skewed that to the point that I thought that I had to be perfect to get the love that I was and that I was unworthy otherwise. It headed off any potential criticism by convincing me that I had to be perfect in order to get love. And then along comes Dad, and nothing that I do can win his affection, and voila. There's something wrong with me because no matter how perfect I try to be, it's not enough to be loved by him. Very interesting. That actually does sound plausible. And what my young mind didn't understand at the time was that it didn't have anything to do with me or my lack of worthiness. It was just that Mom's hands were incredibly full with Nathan. I was the easy child, and Nathan was the squeaky wheel that got the grease. Mom was raising us alone and doing the best she could. Does that make sense, little one? I'm talking to my little girl exile part. You weren't doing anything wrong. You weren't deficient in any way. Mom just had a lot to handle. You were just fine the way that you were. You didn't need to try to be better to win affection. You didn't need to be perfect to be loved. You already were perfect just the way you were. You already were loved just the way you were. You didn't need to struggle and strive. I'm sorry that you weren't made to feel that just being yourself was enough. I'm sorry that you thought that you had to do something, be something different. So realize now that it wasn't true. You always were and always will be enough, just as you are. So as to the superego, my judge, I need to find out what triggers it and what its exact motives are. This is my inner critic, but it operates on two different levels, internally and externally. Internally, the judge is triggered when I do something that goes against her high standards or expectations. Her standards and expectations are there in order to protect the ego self, my idea of who I think that I am or how I want to be perceived by others. So what then is the motive? The ego wants to be perceived as being lovable, valuable, worthy of love and affection. The ego thinks that it will get love by being peaceable, by not offending, by being non-confrontational, by being sweet and affectionate, by being liked, by being caring. So if the motives of the superego are to keep the rest of the ego self in line in order to protect it from feeling pain, it gets triggered when I do something outside of its perfectionistic standards that specifically dictate how I come across to other people. The main goal here seems to be to get love from other people. If I do something that it thinks will compromise that, it punishes me with criticism to get me to fall back in line. How does it want to be perceived, and therefore what are its expectations of me? I make a little list. Perfect in every way. Okay, more specifically. Sweet, caring, affectionate, non-confrontational, peaceable. Smart, studious, intelligent, athletic, pretty. That was one thing that I always seemed to be valued for, even by Dad. A hard worker, adventurous, courageous, strong. So then how does that translate? The judge criticizes me for being selfish, not generous enough, outspoken, vocal about my own opinions, emotional, showing weakness, lazy, fat, weak-willed, undisciplined, not being good at activities, even if there's no way that I could be, i.e. not having any experience at it. I'll add in a little note. I had a pattern of not trying things, not attempting new experiences out of fear of not being good at it, but it was like I expected myself to be good at it on the first try before ever having practiced it or acquired the skills. So, sorry, that was a side note. So this is continuing the list of the things that my judge criticizes me for: being antisocial, socially awkward, weird, unsuccessful, and not creative or artistic. So essentially, I want to be seen as sweet, caring, generous, beautiful, intelligent, good at everything I try, even without practice, the soft-spoken peacemaker, creative, artistic, successful by worldly standards, loved by everyone, with no enemies, with depth and mystery, but not emotional and weak. I want to be admired and loved by all, but in an accessible way. Essentially, I want to be perfect in other people's eyes. The judge's motives in these expectations are to keep me loved and to keep me from being hurt. Any deviation from this perfection triggers intense criticism. And I realize that those are impossible standards to live up to. I know that I can't, and that it is entirely unrealistic and ridiculous to think that I ever could. And so I guess I just need to bring awareness to these triggers and then go back to the idea of self-compassion that I learned long ago. And also remember why the superego is there in the first place. Its self-appointed role of trying to protect me. Actually, not the real me, but the false self from pain. If I can soften this inner critic enough, then I'll be able to get to the exiles that it antagonizes. I just spent a lot of time talking about how the superego works internally, but this inner critic also judges externally as well. Other people and external circumstances. So what are the motivations behind this kind of judgment? Well, I'm sure there are a number of different reasons, many of which are probably based on protection from perceived threats to the ego self. For instance, I think this judgment comes into play regarding trying a new activity. This is the fear of failure. The judge perceives that I might not be good at something, so it prevents me from trying so as to avoid breaking its expectations that I be good at everything. Or this might come into play when considering participating in social situations. The idea that I might not be liked, or the fear that I will do something so as to appear as though I don't live up to the expectations that my super ego has for me, keeps me from interacting with others so that I don't mess up and do something they won't like. If I don't even try, I can't fail. But this also comes into play when I judge other people for their flaws. Oftentimes, I end up judging people for things I don't like within myself. I make myself feel better for my own shortcomings by being relieved that at least I'm not that bad. Or sometimes I judge people for things that I'm not even consciously aware that I do myself. My subconsciousness knows, though. I judge other people to either make myself feel better by comparison or to protect myself from a perceived threat. And then I have the little diagram about the false self, the ego, and the superego. And I'll include that as a picture on this video. And that's the end of that entry and the end of that journal. So I'm going to stop this. Oh yeah, because it's running quite long. So I will be back to share more with you later. Okay, bye. Be well.